In the believing brain, my thesis is that we find patterns. I call this patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in both meaningful and meaningless noise. So we find patterns, we connect A to B, that's called learning. Everybody does it, all animals from C. elegans to H. sapiens, and if we didn't do it, we wouldn't survive. Our genomes are not, cannot hold enough information to deal with a always constantly changing complex environment, so we're able to learn. And learning allows us to adapt in real time to a changing environment. Unfortunately, we're not good at detecting true patterns from false patterns, so the default option is just to assume all patterns are real, just in case. All A's are connected to B's in some causal way. That's just what our brains assume. And then on top of that, so God, in a way, God is like the ultimate pattern that explains everything. Then on top of that, we also infuse those patterns with intentional agency, and I call this agenticity, the tendency to infuse these patterns with intentional agents. And so, in other words, we assume not just that it's a real pattern, but that the pattern has something behind it, some intentional agent. So my thought experiment is, imagine you're a hominid in the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. Your name is Lucy. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator, or is it just the wind? Well, if you assume that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, it turns out it's just the wind, you've made a type 1 error in cognition, a false positive. You thought A was connected to B and it's not. But no harm. If you, on the other hand, think that the rustle in the grass is just the wind and it turns out it's a dangerous predator, you're lunch. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool before reproducing. So we are the descendants of those who were best at finding these meaningful patterns, with the default rule of thumb that all rustles in the grass are dangerous predators. All patterns are real. But note the difference between a dangerous predator and just the wind. Just the wind is an inanimate force. A dangerous predator is an intentional agent, and he intends to eat me, and that can't be good. So we assume that predators have agency, intention, they're alive, they're, even if you can't see them, we assume that they're there. So in a way, God is like that. He's like this invisible agent in the sky that runs the world. It's the ultimate explanatory pattern. And then we layer on top of that this sort of whole social construction of religion, which reinforces the rules of cooperation and pro-sociality and altruism and being nice and keeps human aggression in check and so forth. And so God is like the ultimate enforcer of the rules, that hidden, invisible, intentional agent behind the patterns that keeps social cohesiveness together in human society. So to that extent, religion's pretty important. At least it has been up till now. I don't think we necessarily need it now, but we did then, and that's why it evolved.
Here's my basic concern. Our ability to cause ourselves harm is now spreading with 21st century efficiency, and yet we are still, to a remarkable degree, drawing our vision of how to live in this world from ancient literature. This marriage of modern technology, destructive technology, and Iron Age philosophy is a bad one, for reasons that I think nobody should have to specify, much less argue for. And yet arguing for them has taken up most of my time since September 11th, 2001. That day that 19 pious men showed our pious nation just how socially beneficial religious certainty can be. Now, as someone who has spent a few years publicly criticizing religion, I've become quite familiar with how people rise to the defense of God. As it turns out, there are not 100 ways of doing this. There appear to be just 3. Either a person argues that a specific religion is true, or he argues that religion is useful, and indeed so useful that it might be necessary, or he argues that atheism is essentially another religion, dogmatic, intolerant, or otherwise worthy of contempt. And I want to differentiate these 3 strands of argument, because they regularly run together, and any conversation between a believer and non-believers is liable to fall into one of these ruts. Let's begin with the specific claim that a given religion is true. There are 2 problems with arguing this. The first is that, as Bertrand Russell pointed out over a century ago, they can't all be true. I mean, given the sheer diversity of religions on offer, even if we knew that one of them was absolutely true. I mean, even if we knew this was God's multiple choice exam, is it A, Judaism, B, Christianity, C, Islam? Even if we knew we were in this situation, every believer should expect to wind up in hell purely as a matter of probability. It seems to me this should give religious people pause before they espouse their religious certainties. It never does, but it should. The second problem with arguing for the truth of religion is that the evidence for our religious doctrines is either terrible or non-existent. And this subsumes all claims about the existence of a personal God, the divine origin of certain books, the virgin birth of certain people, the veracity of ancient miracles, all of it. And consider Christianity. The entire doctrine is predicated on the idea that the gospel account of the miracles of Jesus is true. This is why people believe Jesus was the Son of God, divine, etc. This textual claim is problematic because everyone acknowledges that the Gospels followed Jesus' ministry by decades, and there's no extra biblical account of his miracles. But the truth is quite a bit worse than that. The truth is, even if we had multiple contemporaneous eyewitness accounts of the miracles of Jesus, this still would not provide sufficient basis to believe that these events actually occurred. Well, why not? Well, the problem is that first-hand reports of miracles are quite common, even in the 21st century. I have met literally hundreds at this point of Western-educated men and women who think that their favorite Hindu or Buddhist guru has magic powers. The powers ascribed to these gurus are every bit as outlandish as those ascribed to Jesus. I actually remain open to evidence of such powers, but the fact is that people who tell these stories desperately want to believe them. All, to my knowledge, lack the kind of corroborating evidence we should require before believing that nature's laws have been abrogated in this way. And people who believe these stories show an uncanny reluctance to look for non-miraculous causes. But it remains a fact that yogis and mystics are said to be walking on water and raising the dead and flying without the aid of technology, materializing objects, reading minds, foretelling the future, right now. In fact, all of these powers have been ascribed to Satya Sai Baba, the South Indian guru, by an uncountable number of eyewitnesses. He even claims to have been born of a virgin, which is not all that uncommon a claim in the history of religion. Or in history generally. Genghis Khan supposedly was born of a virgin, as was Alexander. Apparently, parthenogenesis doesn't guarantee that you're going to turn the other cheek. But Satya Sai Baba is not a fringe figure. He's not the David Koresh of Hinduism. His followers threw a birthday party for him recently, and 1 million people showed up. So there are vast numbers of people who believe he is a living God. You can even watch his miracles on YouTube. Prepare to be underwhelmed. It's true that he has an afro of sufficient diameter as to suggest a total detachment from the opinions of his fellow human beings, but I'm not sure this is reason enough to worship him. In any case, so consider, as though for the first time, the foundational claim of Christianity. The claim is this, that miracle stories of a sort that today surround a person like Satya Sai Baba become especially compelling when you set them in the pre-scientific religious context of the first century Roman Empire, decades after their supposed occurrence. We have Satya Sai Baba's miracle stories attested to by thousands upon thousands of living eyewitnesses, and they don't even merit an hour on the Discovery Channel. But you place a few miracle stories in some ancient books, and half the people on this earth think it a legitimate project to organize their lives around them. Does anyone else see a problem with that?
I think it's a few things to say here. It's easy to exaggerate the problem, and it's easy to overlook very important differences among religions. I mean, one problem with a discussion like this is we have a word religion that is a suitcase term. I mean, religion is a word like sport. You know, you have a sport like, you know, Thai boxing, where people get killed and hit in the head with elbows and knees, and then you have a sport like lawn bowling. You know, what is in common between these sports apart from breathing? Not much. And yet they're both sports. And religion is like that. You have a religion like Jainism, which I occasionally reference because it is the one truly nonviolent religion. I mean, the core dogma of Jainism is nonviolence. So that no matter how fanatical you get as a Jain, you are never going to be a Jain bomber. I mean, you simply cannot make sense of it by the lights of Jainism. Now, by no stretch of the imagination is Islam a religion of nonviolence. Islam is a religion of violence in certain circumstances, and it is a great danger to us all that these circumstances can be construed with enough agility as to apply almost anywhere, anytime, to anyone who wants to die for the faith. Now, I'm not saying all Muslims view their religion this way, but there are very few tools within Islam by which to say, oh, Osama bin Laden has completely misconstrued the faith. He has not completely misconstrued the faith. So between Islam and Jainism, you know, we have a range of convictions and behaviors born of them. And the style of discourse that you're using to talk about, again, what religion should be, not what it is, I would argue, just obfuscates this terrain. We have people really killing and dying based on propositions that they are granting credence to, and these beliefs are thriving in a context in which they are immune to criticism. And we are collaborating in that process by not criticizing them publicly, incessantly, relentlessly until we break this spell.
The problem of evil is a huge one. I'm not just talking about why did God allow the Holocaust or genocides, because you would say that's human free will. What about childhood cancer? Why should thousands, tens of thousands of infants, little children die of leukemia and other horrible diseases, not to mention what it does to the families who love them? Why would a good God allow that? What is the answer to that? Other than we're told, well, God works in mysterious ways. Well, it'd be nice if he worked in less mysterious ways and did something about it. But he doesn't, so it's up to us. It's always up to us. It's up to you. It's up to me to make the world a better place. Not to turn to some other supernatural force that may or may not come. Not to give up what we have now in hope of some blissful state in some other place. Here and now is what counts. Now is when you should be trying to do something to make the world a better place. Now is the time to make your relationships count with other people. Not in some other world where this is a mere prepping stage for the next life. It's this life that counts, regardless of whether there's another life or not. And historically, this is what has driven the moral arc forward. Expanding the moral sphere to include more people into our moral considerations. That is what has driven change. You and I, individuals standing up and saying, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We demand the same rights as everybody else. I don't care what your religion is. This is what's right and fair. That's how it matters. That's what makes a difference. Not in some other life, but here and now. Who makes the rules? We make the rules. What did you say? The eternal referent is what we make of it. It's our rules. It's always been up to us. 100 years ago, you would think very differently about blacks and Jews and women than you do now. What happened? There's no new biblical scriptures that have come down on high through some prophet. No theologian has discovered a new way to interpret the Old or New Testament that said, thou shalt not enslave thy fellow man. It's not in there. Thou shalt not oppress women or blacks. It's not in there. It didn't come from religion. It never comes from religion. It comes from you and I. It comes from oppressed people saying, enough! Stop it! I'm going to fight back. And then the people surrounding them start to take on the cause. And then it changes, and then it happens, and then religions get on board and go, you know what, that's a good idea. That's how it happens. It's up to you and I. So let me end with the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who I started with, who is the inspiration for my book and my hero. He said, the great burden of life is to always try to keep that higher self in command. And every time that old lower self acts up and tells us to do wrong, let us allow the higher self to tell us that we were made for the stars, created for the everlasting, born for eternity. Well, we are in fact made from the stars. Our atoms were forged in the interiors of ancient stars that ended their lives in spectacular paroxysms of supernova explosions that dispersed those atoms into space, where they coalesced into new solar systems with planets, life, and sentient beings capable of such sublime knowledge and moral wisdom. We are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon. Morality is something that carbon atoms can embody, given a billion years of evolution, the moral arc. Thank you.
It starts out as it were, wild superstitions that happen just because they can.
Yeah.
They're exploiting, they're getting in the cracks of our cognitive machinery. Then they're around, they can be used. People begin appreciating them. People begin to use them for other purposes, and now we're on our way to organized religion.
So the uses of it might be with individuals who have some belief, but then find that the reinforcement for their own careers or their own status or their own something or other is enhanced.
Not only that, but of course parents saying, even if I'm not watching you, the rain god is watching you. All kinds of uses for these ideas.
And if the children are then better behaved when the parent is not there,
exactly,
and that helps the community,
sure,
because they're better behaved,
yeah,
that's reinforced.
That's right. And so it goes. And so we have a multi-level process of competition and selection. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is there have been not hundreds, not thousands, probably not just hundreds of thousands, there have probably been millions of religions that have started since religion started. Almost all of them are extinct. Sects start every day, more than the websites can keep track of. Most of them have a life of days, weeks, a few last for years, sometimes a generation or two, then they go extinct. This has been happening not just in our century, this has been happening for thousands of years. And the ones that we see, the ones that have the big budgets and the big churches and the history of music and all the rest, those are the hardy survivors of a very large competition.
Some would claim that they're the legitimate ones, therefore they have survived and grown.
Well, they can't all be legitimate because they disagree completely on what's
another question.
What's at the heart of them. But so we need something aside from legitimacy to explain their power to hold people's allegiances, because only one of them could be the truth, and the other one's just as strong allegiances.
You make a very interesting comment that if we value something, we have to value it for a reason, which sounds obvious, but is a methodological window to begin to explore different ways to determine value.
Yeah, I think one of the things we learned from biology is that nothing persists over time unless it, to put it crudely and crassly, unless it pays for itself. Mm-hmm. It has to pay for itself in winning some tournament of differential reproduction. Now, it may be at the gene level, it may be at the organism level, it may be at many different levels.
Group level.
Could be at the group level. But something has to explain its persistence, because things don't just, complicated things need maintenance, they need renewal, they need repair, they need replication. And all of this rebuilding and replication and replacement and repair takes time and energy. And so something has to pay for it.
What are some examples of different ways that religion can be valued through this process? You've used an analogy, for example, to our desire for sweets.
Yeah, the sweet tooth. Yeah, it's a nice example because it seems obvious first that we like sweet things because they taste so good.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's really the other way around. They taste so good because we like them. And there's a deep reason why they should taste good to us, because they are a great energy source. Mm-hmm. And they co-evolved, sweet things, sweet fruits, ripe fruits, for instance. They co-evolved with our love of them. It was a bargain between fruit-producing plants and frugivores like us and like all the other animals that eat fruits, and they get more energy from the ripe ones, and so they have evolved a preference, and that's our sweet tooth. Now, on top of that, think of what we've built. We have the world of confection and sugar cane, and it's a huge international, multinational conglomerate of activity. And there's the dentists and the tooth decay, all of this, all because of this bargain struck millions of years ago between ripe fruit who needed their seed spread. Now,
with some nice fertilizer around it.
Absolutely. So there's one biological root, and you might say, well, it's a sort of infamous bargain, isn't it? Well, we're the beneficiaries in many ways. It's nice to have that sweet stuff around because we like it, and we like it because it's because we evolved to like it.
All right, so let's draw the analogy to religion.
To draw the analogy to religion is we clearly love our religions. That is, those who do love them, they love them. This is like a love affair. And I think, in fact, religions have evolved to exploit some of the evolved dispositions, emotional reactions that we have to romantic love. It is a point of honor that if somebody disses your loved one, you're ready to fight. Not just, I beg your pardon, but, those are fighting words. That aggressive tendency to protect and defend the loved one makes perfectly good sense biologically if you just think about competition for mates. That it would be harnessed by religions is not so obvious, but I think it's clear. And why are religions such storehouses of beauty, of visual beauty, of musical beauty, of architectural beauty? Why do they? This isn't an accident, of course. This is design. Because religions have evolved to appeal to our sweet tooth. In this case, our love of beauty, which almost certainly has its genesis in sexual attraction. So it's all sublimated sex, but not in the way that Freud thought. So if we think about all the features of religions from a biological, more particularly an evolutionary point of view, we see lots of design features that are otherwise sometimes a bit baffling, I think. And I think that these features haven't been, as it were, consciously, deliberately designed for the most part by, clever priests, say. No, it's just that the religions that happen to have this mutation did better than the religions that didn't. And so they spread themselves better than the religions that didn't have them.
What are some specific examples or analogies of how religions have mimicked, if you will, some of the other biological characteristics of evolution?
Let's take a sort of scary example. There are lots of parasites that depend on manipulating the host body that they enter. And one of the things they do is to get more energy for themselves by destroying the sexual organs of the parasite. They neuter their host. Gee, I wonder if we ever see anything like this in religion. Certainly the celibacy of the Catholic Church would suggest itself as a case where you get the full attention and energies of a certain group of hosts by more or less cutting off what otherwise they might spend a lot of energy on. Of course, it doesn't work all that well, does it?
Right.
But there would be an example.
Yeah.
But there's many others.
What kind of next steps do you think would be productive for human society to make to understand religions?
Well, I think first of all, we have to do what Socrates always told us to do, is to realize what we don't know. Mm-hmm. The fact is, we don't know a lot that we think we know about religion. And I'm saying, I don't know it, and I'm saying nobody knows. And we jolly well should try to find out using good old scientific methods. Mm. We can't just rely on our good intentions, and good intentions aren't enough. And we can't rely on tradition, because tradition isn't good enough. Let's find out what makes religions tick, how they attract people, and then we'll have some idea of how to build on that. Now, there's a lot of people who've tried to reform their religions in the last, say, 100 years. Some of those reforms were disastrous. Why? Their intentions were fine. They didn't understand the nature of this sort of organism that they were trying to fix. So it doesn't matter whether you think religions should go extinct or should become stronger. You should try to understand how they work, their physiology, if you like, their ecology. Now, if you look at religion now, you see hugely different from what it was 100 years ago, which was hugely different from what it was 1,000 years ago. What's religion going to be in 10 years? It probably will evolve as much in the next 10 and 20 years as it has in the last 100. I'd like to be part of a planned attempt to channel that evolution of religion down paths that are socially useful.
Jefferson, of course, famously ultimately went through the New Testament and cut out all the miracles and created the Jefferson Bible, which is still used as the Bible of the Unitarian Church. He said, but don't study the Bible until you're 17 and you're able to read it critically, because otherwise it becomes propaganda. And you will be taught to believe things that defy reason and defy common sense. He also said to Peter Carr, I'm not going to tell you what my own religious beliefs are. He didn't even tell his own children. He said, that's my business. When he was accused of being an atheist in the 1800 election, campaign slogans were Adams and God or Jefferson without God, he refused to take the bait. He didn't do what Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Rudy Giuliani, and everybody else is doing. Oh no, let me tell you how often I go to church. Let me tell you how Jesus has helped me in my personal life. No, Jefferson wouldn't do that. He said, my religion is between me and my God, and I'm not going to discuss it publicly ever, at any time, with any person in a political context, or even in a context that was less political. It was just too personal for him. And it was ever-changing. He does discuss religion later on in his letters with Adams, but they're intimate letters, they're personal letters, particularly with Abigail Adams. And you see a man, all three of them, Abigail Adams and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, changing their views about religion. Less religious, a little bit more religious as they get older, hoping maybe to meet in some heaven, but not sure. And it's very interesting. And he says to his nephew, he says, if your study leads you to believe in a God, that might help you in your life in some ways. But if your studies lead you to believe there is no God, don't worry, that's fine too. And then he, interestingly enough, does the opposite of the Pascal wager. He says, if there is a God, and he is a good God, he will reward you not for the rightness of your views, but for the righteousness of your quest. The exact opposite of the betting parlor theory of religion that Pascal proposed, saying you're better off betting on the existence of God, because if there is a God, and the God of Pascal is a God, it would smack you around if you came to the wrong conclusion and reward you only if you came to the correct conclusion. Jefferson had a completely different view. The other thing that's very important to understand when going back and looking at the historical material is at the time of the framing, at the time of the Declaration, at the time of the Constitution, there was no debate in America about the existence of God. You cannot find any literature debating the existence of God at the time. There was a little bit of debate in France. Voltaire said, I don't believe in God, but I'm so happy that my lawyer and my accountant and my wife believe in God because it will make them toe the line and they won't steal from me. Very pragmatic view, an elitist view of God. But you don't find that debate in America. You find even Thomas Paine, the most virulent critic of Christianity, of Judeo-Christianity, in his book, The Age of Reason, says, of course, I believe in God and I believe in heaven. And so there is no real debate. The debate at the time, and it was a very important debate, was about the God of the Bible, the God of Christianity. And the framers simply rejected Christianity. Jefferson was not a Christian. There's no way you can make Jefferson into a Christian. Jefferson rejects the Trinity. Jefferson rejects the virgin birth. Jefferson rejects the divine birth of Jesus. Jefferson rejects the biblical authorship by God. Jefferson rejects the story of the flood. He says someday the story of Jesus' birth will rank along with the story of Minerva and the myths of this and that and the other thing. There's no way you can call Jefferson a Christian. Of course, when he ran for office, he too sometimes allowed his political supporters to say he was a Christian, but he's not going to discuss the nature of his Christianity. Adams, very, very major changes in his life. Started out as a radical, attacked Jefferson, of course, during the political campaigns for not being a Christian, and then himself died in the same set of beliefs as a Unitarian, which means basically, the way Adams described it, that he thought Jesus essentially was the first Reformed rabbi. Did away with the ritual, and did away and talked about the philosophy being more important than the ritual. After all, it was Jesus who said, it's not what you put in your body, but what's in your heart and your soul that's important. I've heard that Reformed rabbis make that same claim many, many, many times. And so the complex history of what the framers intended by the First Amendment, by the provisions of the Constitution. There are other parts of the Constitution that are a little bit more ambiguous. The religious right is correct when it said that the words in the First Amendment were not necessarily, as written, intended to prohibit states, as distinguished from the federal government, from supporting religion. Plainly, the words of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, really was intended to say that the federal government can neither establish or disestablish or require the states to establish or disestablish a particular church. There cannot be a United States church. And one of the most important pieces of evidence about how important the framers felt and how universal this feeling was when the United States was at war with the Barbary pirates, and they made a treaty at the Barbary coast that Adams wrote. He was president, and written by John Jay, signed by Adams, approved by Jefferson, supported by a unanimous Senate consisting of many who were at the Constitutional Convention. That treaty says the United States is in no sense a Christian nation. Nothing could have been clearer. And it was said in a way that makes it relevant so much to today. It was an attempt to persuade the Muslims of the Barbary coast that we do not engage in religious warfare. We do not represent Christianity in this country, and therefore you may be a Muslim nation, but don't attack us as a Christian nation. We are not a Christian nation. We are a secular nation in which the majority of our people happen to be Christians. And it's so interesting. I always ask my students the Trivial Pursuit question: what is the one event that led Thomas Jefferson to grow? Jefferson was a states' rights guy, a Virginian, not enthusiastic about a central constitution. In the beginning, very cool to the Constitution, wasn't sure maybe the Articles of Confederacy were better. One event occurred that led him dramatically to move in great support of a central constitution and in support of a navy, and that event is Islamic terrorism, the Barbary pirates. And what happened is Adams and Jefferson went to visit with the ambassador from the Barbary states when they were both in London, And Jefferson said, you can't be killing our people. They were beheading American sailors. They were enslaving American women, enslaving American children. And the ambassador said, I'll read you Jefferson's letter because it is so relevant to today. You'd think it could be written today. This is the letter that Jefferson wrote to the Secretary of State after meeting with the ambassador. The ambassador answered us that the right was founded on the laws of the prophet, that it was written in their Quran, the right to kill, that all nations who should not have answered their authority were sinners, and that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all who they could take as prisoners. Listen to this last sentence. And that every Muslim who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. All right, there were no 12, there were no 72 virgins, but everything short of the 72 virgins were in that proposal. 72 virgins, by the way, is a very, very recent innovation in extremist Islamic rhetoric. And I have this plan. I'm trying to get some much more secular Muslim leaders to finally persuade if it's a misreading. You don't get 72 virgins for killing innocent people. You only get one 72-year-old virgin. Maybe
We are in a circumstance where things can matter, right? Consciousness is the condition in which things can matter, where there can be a range of experiences, some of which are very, very bad. If the word bad means anything, they're bad. And some of which are very, very good, if the word good means anything. And we are navigating in that space. We can't help but navigate or seek to navigate in that space.
Right, absolutely.
And religion is one form of conversation about that navigation problem. And I would argue
let's go back to the
well,
ideal.
often diluted one.
Whilst Jordan rolls his sleeves up.
Bad girl.
He means business now.
Bad girl.
But
Bad girl and Catwoman are approximations to a higher ideal. That's what they are.
Well, and to return to this with a biblical idea, I'm fairly sure from personal experience that a lot of parents are perfectly content with bringing their children up vaguely within the story they've inherited. And at some point, the children realize that the fairy doesn't bring them money when their teeth fall out. And at some point, maybe around the same time or a bit later, they discover that Santa Claus doesn't really come down the chimney. And at some point, they realize that actually the whole religious thing is a kind of metaphor, but it's got them through the formative years in some way. Often with terrible damage along the way, I concede that. But also with something else. And I'm struck by the number of people, and this is why I share some of what I think is Jordan's concern about the possibility of the world you're envisaging, which is, I can think of a lot of parents now, in my country and other countries as well, who I'm just very struck. They themselves are kind of baby boomer or 60s atheists, humanists, whatever. And I start to notice, for instance, that they're enrolling their children in Christian schools. And I say to them, why are you doing this? And they have fairly coherent arguments along the lines of the one I've just had. Look, I don't particularly believe this myself, but I think it's a pretty good way to bring up the kids. It's a structure of a kind. And I'm not sure, I can find all sorts of flaws in that. But enough people are doing it that it's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, well, I would say yes. It speaks to a real failure of imagination and effort in the secular community to produce truly non-embarrassing alternatives.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is across the board. This is not just school. This is how do you conduct a funeral? How do you get married? You know, all of the what rites of passage can you offer a 13-year-old?
What are you doing here? What are we doing here?
Yeah.
Just to be the first people in history to have absolutely no explanation for what we're doing at all. Is a big moment.
Yeah. Yes.
And
that's the
that sharpens up my concern perfectly, because to shrink back from that moment and resort to one of the pseudo stories of the past, I consider to be a failure of nerve, both intellectually and morally.
So let's go back to the superhero idea. One of the things you might notice about superheroes is that some of them are actually deities. Right, so in the Marvel pantheon, you have Thor, for example, and so there's a very thin line between the idea of a superhero and the idea of a god, especially if you think about it in a polytheistic manner. So the modern superheroes and the Greek gods, for example, share a tremendous number of features in common. And so here's something to think about. So there's a reason that people admire superheroes, and it's because they act out parts of the hero archetype. That's the technical reason. They're obviously acting something out because that's how you can tell they're superheroes. They share some set of characteristics across the set of superheroes that makes them superheroes. Now the question might be, what is the essential element of being a superhero that makes you a superhero? And the answer, the way that that was solved historically, is that as polytheistic societies developed, and that was usually a consequence of isolated tribes coming into contact with one another, they each had their separate deities. And then over the course of time, those deities warred in actual wars with people, but also conceptually. And out of that polytheistic framework was extracted something that was vaguely monotheistic, as all of those cultures came together to try to determine what their highest ideal should be. So that's the God of gods, that's a way of thinking about it, or the King of kings, that's another way of thinking about it. And that's an implicit ideal.
Well,
and you could make the case that there's nothing more...
Tell that to the Hindus. You tell that to the Hindus. I mean, we've got 1.2 billion people, or maybe it's 1.4 now, who are operating in a religiously saturated system that does not conform to that ideal. There is no one on top of it all.
Well, they're still associated.
Arguably, there's three on top of it all, but
there's still an attempt to generate that polytheistic, to integrate that polytheistic reality underneath a single rubric, or you have nothing but continual dissociation of the culture. And I'm not saying this is necessary.
That's a pretty good description of what's going on in India at the moment.
Well, I'm not saying that this is inevitable either. And there is a tension. The problem, this is Nietzsche's observation, and Mircea Eliade as well, the problem with extracting out the highest God from the panoply of gods is the ideal becomes so abstract that it disappears. That's the death of God. And Eliade has tracked that phenomena over multiple cultures. It's not something that's unique to the West. So the danger of that abstraction is that it gets too abstract and disappears and leaves us in the situation that Douglas just pointed out.
Can I throw us back to the key issue of Elton John's glass, which you came up with the other night? Because there's something I wanted to add to that. If perhaps you'd explain why I said Elton John's glass just now.
Well, it came back to this question of what makes something valuable, and I used as an example in Vancouver on one of those nights. If I had a glass here, which I said was actually it was the glass that Elton John used the last time he played in this theater, suddenly it seems to be a more valuable glass. And then Jordan and I argued about just what the status of that value was. I don't know where you want to take this, but yeah.
Well, it's just one thing in particular, which is that the whole issue of what it is you give value to, and let's say that glass was demonstrated for a time to having been drunk from by Elton John at his final concert or his latest farewell tour, whatever.
Yes.
So that's already a glass with some meaning. Let's say that over the years, the whole attribution of that glass becomes debatable. Over a long period of time, a lot of things are going to have happened around it, and to stretch this to breaking point, possibly. Let's say at some point people lose their lives over whether that is Elton John's glass or not. Well, let's say that people start to lose blood.
Let's not just say that. Let's recognize that is the world we're living in with respect to other religions.
So the problem is that we end up, when we're talking about religion, it's the same thing when you're talking about land. You're not just talking about any inherent worth. You're talking also about the worth of things people have given up for this.
Yeah.
And so we end up giving the layers of things. Well, no, it's more than that. We inherit more and more layers of the meaning because other people before us have given that meaning to it. So that by the time you have this object, it's an object of worth, even if it's of no worth in itself at all. But because of the amount of worth that people before you have given to it. And that seems to some extent what we're doing with the religion discussion.
Yes. I am nobody special. I just happened to read a book that caught my attention, the book by Peter Boghossian, Manual for Creating Atheists. I read it, and it blew me away. I thought, here's a possible solution to improving the conversations that we have with people. And I was having difficult conversations with believers, not only strangers, but also my family members. I think the conversations proved problematic because I was engaging in debate. I was trying to correct my family members' view of reality. I was telling them what to think. I was sharing links to reports that would show that, no, the Earth is really older than 6,000 years old. I was providing them with evidence, and I wasn't taking the time to engage with them in Socratic questioning. Socratic method essentially started with Socrates. I think Plato probably wrote a story about Socrates in which his main character, Socrates, was asking questions. He was challenging the status quo. He wasn't correcting people as much as he was asking, how do you know that that's true? People rarely slow down to think about the beliefs that they formed. They're forming them, but they don't usually reflect on the formation process. Whether you believe in a God or you don't, it doesn't really matter the beliefs that we hold. We don't usually take the time to inspect the steps that we use to get there. Street epistemology is largely based on the Socratic method, but we've added to it. Street epistemology is essentially a dialogue between two people, usually, to uncover the reliability of the method that a person used to conclude that their belief is true. We're not interested so much in what they believe or even the reasons why per se, but it's the methodology, it's the epistemology, it's the way that they came to believe that this thing is true. It seems like what you were saying is that faith is required in order to conclude that the Holy Spirit is even real and is putting these things, these ideas or these concepts in you or helping you figure things out. Okay. If faith wasn't available to you as an option, would you be holding this belief?
What is life without faith? How miserable. Well, I can't imagine life to be available without faith. If I didn't have...
Can I be more specific?
Sure.
If believing in things that you can't see wasn't available to you, I'm using your definition of it. Mm-hmm. If hoping that this was true and believing in things that you can't see wasn't available to you as an option, would you be concluding that there was a Holy Spirit and a God and that the scripture was real and all this stuff and there's an afterlife?
I don't know the answer to that because it's hard for me to fathom that.
And that, in essence, is what street epistemology is. It's not debating. It's not ridiculing. It's asking questions to completely understand what the person believes in a way that helps them see for themselves what they believe, acting like a mirror in a way, reflecting back so that they can hear their own words, pausing at times so that they can hear what they've just said, they can think it over in their mind, and being possibly even open to what they're saying. And one other thing that we try to do in street epistemology is get a sense of how sure a person is that their belief is true. Usually on a scale from 0 to 100, and it's completely optional, but it helps us get a sense of where a person is at.
I've seen things in life through my upbringing that I know that I believe only God could have done that.
Are you arriving at that conclusion, however, because you were actually taught that the God exists in the first place?
Probably.
I think doubt is virtuous. I think doubt is healthy. Doubt is the thing that prevents us from becoming victims. It's something that we should all be doing. We should embrace doubt. And there does seem to be a perception amongst religious people that doubt is harmful, doubt is bad, doubt is scary, that you should avoid it at all costs. And one of the challenges, I think, when we are engaging in these conversations with folks is to disarm the word doubt, that doubt is actually a virtuous thing. And it's kind of difficult sometimes. Sometimes just rephrasing it and asking a person, have you ever questioned about this? Have you ever wondered? That might be a good first step rather than scaring people with that word doubt. On a scale from 0 to 100, how confident would you say that you are that a God is real? 0 would be, I have no confidence at all. It's all questions, it's all doubt. 100%. No question in my mind. I'm entirely 100% confident that it's true.
I'm gonna say about 20, 25.
Okay.
So, like, there's stuff, I'm not saying, like, miracles don't happen, but the same thing is, like, certain things may cause that to happen.
Somebody can claim that they've had a miracle, but it's hard to tell whether it really was a God that did it or some other explanation.
Yes.
Yeah. I was recently at the American Atheist Convention in Oklahoma City, and we were scheduled to give one workshop and a short talk the next day, and we filled up the first room to capacity for the workshop. I was overwhelmed by the amount of people that would come up to me to say how grateful they were to be exposed to a different method of conversing with believers about a sensitive topic like a God existing. Many people at the conference, I think, were aware of pretty much only one way, presenting facts and perhaps arguing with others. And I think they found it to be a relief, I think, that there might be a different option, there might be a more productive way of challenging a person's deeply held belief without shutting down the conversation. I titled my talk, Street Epistemology, A Turning Point for Atheism, and I really do think that once the history books of atheism are written about the success of atheism in America, that there will be chapters written on street epistemology. And the only question that I really have is, are the people who are in this community, in this movement, willing and able to give this method a try?
Hello everyone, I hope you've loved that video as much as I did creating it, man. In this section of the video, I'd like to do the third installment of a series we started last week, where we take a look at some of the most absurd and evil verses from the Bible and wonder, in what possible world was it appropriate for an all-loving and all-caring God to command his people to treat other people like this, man? And as you're about to see, these verses don't necessarily have to be the ultra evil commands, like God commanding Saul to kill every last living thing and show no mercy, or when God's chosen people were given divine instructions on how to enslave other people. No, they don't even need to be the cruel sort. And as weird as it sounds, guys, I've always found those major actions easier to defend for Christian apologists. They often tend to go, no, these rules were the only way God could ensure the safety and survival of Israel, or something along those lines. The little things, however, those are the true injustices I find impossible to defend. At least I haven't come across a single person that can even begin to coherently justify them. And a great example is God killing Aaron's children for offering an unauthorized offering and then forbidding Aaron and his remaining sons from mourning these loved ones, lest God chooses to punish the entire Israelite community. Another example is when God instructs Israelites to shun women on their monthly period because they are unclean, and that the men should not even come in contact with any spot that a menstruating lady has come into contact with or has sat on. Speak about getting treated as literal dirt, man. These kinds of laws and passages that are littered throughout the Bible, by the way, perfectly exemplify what we non-believers mean when we say that the Bible couldn't have been inspired by anything with a sense of justice and fairness, let alone an all-loving and all-caring God. So without further ado, let's jump right in and take a look at today's first verse from the fantasy novel, man. Now, this one, all of you are familiar with, Job 2:3, which says, "The Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still persists in his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him for no reason." Now, if you're a skeptic today, then I know for a fact that the story of Job, man, never sat right with you. It never did with me, even back then when I was neck deep in religion and a total believer, man. The thing that I could never wrap my mind around was, why would God, an all-knowing God, an all-knowing being, let Satan, the devil, take his most faithful servant on earth through hell and back, man, just so he could prove a point to the devil? God definitely already knew that Job wasn't going to fold and insult the Lord, so that must mean he let Job go through all that unimaginable destruction in his life just so God could laugh in the devil's face. And in the verse above we've just looked at, even he, God, accepts that Job was destroyed for no reason. And then the Bible tries to bury all this under the rug by claiming that God gave Job everything he had before tenfold and etc., man. Now, I won't pretend to understand the psychological makeup of people from biblical times, but I'd like to bet that losing all your children, your fortune, and literally being on the verge of death, that isn't something that you get over or heal from simply because you get other children and you're healthy again. And imagine learning that you went through all that just so the being that you've dedicated your whole life to serving could prove a point to the nemesis. Anyway, moving on, man. The second one today is Numbers 25, 6-13, which says, "Then an Israelite man brought into the camp a Midianite woman right before the eyes of Moses and the whole assembly of Israel while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite into the tent. He drove the spear into both of them, so right through the Israelite man and into the woman's stomach. Then the plague against the Israelites was stopped. But those who died in the plague numbered 24,000. The Lord then said to Moses, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, has turned my anger away from the Israelites. Since he was as zealous for my honor among them as I am, I did not put an end to them in my zeal. Therefore, tell him I am making my covenant of peace with him. He and his descendants will have a covenant for a lasting priesthood, because he was zealous for the honor of his God and made atonement for the Israelites." Yeah, you heard that right, guys. The lives of an interracial couple were just ended in cold blood by a priest of the loving God in order to keep God's chosen people pure. And after doing that, not only was he praised by God, he was handsomely rewarded for his heinous crime by the same God with a perpetual priesthood for doing the Lord's work. So I guess when Christians say that God commands them to love everyone, it's up to us to read the fine print and see that terms and conditions actually apply. Just think about these guys in 20th century America when the pointed hats people were in full swing and occupying every single institution in the country. This kind of cold-blooded action would have likely still ended the perpetrator in prison. But in the goldly inspired novel, this resulted in a lifetime promotion sanctioned by the one and only loving God. Isn't that crazy, man? Yeah. Anyway, this is the only second one, and I can see the video is already way over 55 minutes, man. So with your permission, please allow me not to make the video any longer than it needs to be. So allow me to continue with the series in Monday's video. So yeah, that's it for today, guys. What do you think about today's rundown? Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Also, kindly please make sure you smash the like button and subscribe to the channel so YouTube can recommend the video to many people who might want to hear these same arguments. Thanks a lot for the support, guys, and I'll see you all lovely people in the next one. Peace.